Hello, and welcome to the Ascendant Art Podcast, where we are on a search for art that is ascending above the mainstream. This is Mike with Catalytic Comics, your host, with Vinny from Little Chad and Joey from Keeper's Cairn. And tonight we have got quite the writer and author as a guest. It is the literature devil, the one that is always the demon haunting the dreams of the woke and of bad storytellers. How are you doing tonight?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic. I'm ready to go.
Very good, very good. I got to say first, so I guess first of all, we'll just jump into the writing. So, of course, all of us here are writers in different capacities. Some of it's comics, short and long, and also writing books. And of course, I know I first got familiar with you just watching your different YouTube videos, like the 12 Rules for Writing, Why is Superman Still Relevant? Tell us a little bit about where your channel got started and what inspired you to start doing it.
I was watching videos, YouTube for a very long time, and then it came out with all these movies were coming out, which were awful and things, and I decided to dip my hat in, and I kind of got started with the rise of the independent media stuff, the rise of all these indie works, because Hollywood decided to just ignite itself on fire and decided to make itself into one big torch that would ignite and illuminate the independent works around them, and it was incredible. And I wanted to just put videos out there and to give a little, I guess, pushback against this whole idea of subjectivity, of themes, and going too far in terms of politics and messaging, and against the idea that craft is meaningless and that stories are meaningless, and that they act, because the way I see it is stories are some of the most important things that we have, going back generations, thousands of years, right back to the beginning of human history. Stories are incredibly important, absolutely important. Neil Gaiman once said, or to paraphrase him, stories, they tell us that not only that do they tell us that dragons exist, they tell us that dragons can be defeated, which are both very important facts to know. And plus, I really like writing. I want to talk about it, and I thought it would be fun to explore those things and those elements. And my very first video, in fact, was there to have a little pushback against some of the things that were going on, and that heroes must be politically correct, and that's not exactly true. So my first video came out, and it was called "Can a Racist Character Be Heroic?" And yeah, they can. So because you can have characters with major flaws, or flaws in character, or things of that nature, and absolutely they can be heroic as long as their actions are heroic and their intentions are heroic in some way. And I looked into the nature of heroism, and that's been like a running theme in some of these videos.
Yes, indeed. And that reminds me too. One that I liked in particular was, of course, also about the concept of the strong, independent female, and just the idea. And I know I'm kind of like branding one concept called catalytic storytelling, which is you look specifically at like how does the person change over the course of the story. And I remember that was one of the points you made, is that if someone is already strong, then if they do something strong, it doesn't tell you anything new. It doesn't tell you any growth happened. And therefore, like, you want to give someone some obstacle to overcome.
Exactly. This is easy to see in terms of the hero's journey, because usually in the hero's journey, you get a green character, like someone who is inexperienced, naive, like a Luke Skywalker type, and then they grow over time. Now, you can have the same thing with like an already strong character, but they still have to struggle. They still have to overcome things that they encounter. Like, for example, one of my favorite stories, my favorite series of all time is Lone Wolf and Cub, that Titanic epic. I know it's a manga, but it's still pretty good.
Which The Mandalorian didn't rip off in any way at all.
Exactly. They did a horrible job. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Ito Ogami, the main character, is like the best. Or he begins the journey. He begins the story already like the best swordsman in Japan. That's why he was designated as the guy who had that one capability of beheading the other lords of the Tokugawa regime, which was a big thing. But long story short, that was huge. They only got the best of the best of the best of the best to be that guy, and that was Ito Ogami. But the obstacles he encounters are like other guys who are really skilled, or like hordes of ninjas, or tricksters, or things of that nature. So he was already really, really strong. He was already like the best swordsman in Japan, essentially. But he had to go up against something that was really challenging, even to him, even to his capacity. And he lost in the beginning. Like he was outsmarted and defeated in the beginning, which is why he started his journey in the first place. So even when you have a character that is monumentally strong, like Ito Ogami, who can like take on small groups of armies by himself, they still need to be challenged. You still need things to struggle against to show how strong they actually are.
Do you think that relates to the times? Because if you look at a lot of the old epics too, almost all the old stories, involved a really strong character. Like you had Hercules, you had
Odysseus.
Odysseus, you had what's the other one? And a biblical
Gil-
reference, the dude with the
Samson.
Gilgamesh,
hair. Yeah,
Gilgamesh,
Yeah,
yeah.
Samson.
like they were all really powerful, but there was something they had to overcome. And I mean, it's freshman English class. It's a static character versus a dynamic character. It seems like a lot of the heroes we get these days are very static. Like they ain't
Yeah.
changing from beginning to end. They're going to be the same person.
I think it came from the idea that I've seen happen quite a bit. It's the same thing that affected comics. After Watchmen, they kind of scrape off the surface level stuff that they can see and that they like, and just kind of turn that into something without actually realizing what actually made these works awesome in the first place. And yeah, I think one of my college professors once mentioned that exact phenomenon, where in the beginning, when we had like Odysseus and Achilles and Samson and Gilgamesh, these were stories that in the beginning of all these great stories, there were all like these over the top, larger than life characters. And only after we got more closer to the modern era did our heroes become more ordinary, become more mundane. We went from kings and queens and gods to your average Joe who works at Starbucks or something like that. So it became more closer to the mundane version as we got closer to the modern day as modernity, essentially, or what we known as modern day civilization. I think back then it was because even today it hasn't really changed, but we really want larger than life characters, because even when we come down to mundane characters, they eventually evolve into something larger than life. Because if it's a good story, they will encounter some extraordinary obstacles, some extraordinary downfall, or whatever it is. It's just the everyman will just be an everyman until he gets entangled in some giant government conspiracy or something like that. Like, it's extraordinary circumstances. So we do like over the top, larger than life characters. It's just something that we really enjoy. It's why Superman still maintains popularity even today. Like that one poll I saw a few years ago, where Marvel might take the cake as the most influential comic book company in America, but Superman is still one of the most popular heroes in the country, and we do like these characters, absolutely.
Isn't Superman like the most recognizable figure in literature worldwide? Like I could have sworn like he was on par with Jesus at one point.
Zack Snyder certainly thinks so. I know that much.
I think that if you look at movies and Hollywood, you can see a repeating cycle where this same phenomenon's happening. If you go back to like old Hollywood, you had the iconic, John Wayne style actors who were, playing the archetypes into the westerns and everything, and that was big. And then they started in the 60s, mid 60s, they started deconstructing them. By the 70s, they were going very like ground level, gritty, and people
Right.
got tired of that. And then you can see the swing back in the late 70s, starting with Star Wars, then getting into the 80s, where you had like Rambo and all the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies, where they went with these mega action stars. And then you can see it swing again. We're starting around Die Hard. You get the Bruce Willis like everyman hero, and that evolves into where we've got now, where they had to kill like the big action hero and they wanted the realistic one, and then everybody complains because they're like, oh, you've got Matt Damon as an action star now, and it didn't work out. We got shaky cam, and we have to have people fake being able to.
What movie I thought did a really great job with the kind of the everyman becoming an action hero was The Rock. Did anyone ever see that one?
Are you talking about with the Nicolas Cage, Sean
Yes.
Connery?
Oh, the movie.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh yes, that one. Yeah.
Yeah,
not,
just
not Dwayne Johnson, The Rock.
No, The Rock. The movie The Rock
Oh,
with
wait,
the
that was
Christian Poindexter who has to go and
He was
disable a bunch of VX gas warheads.
Yeah, he
Oh,
was
I remember that.
a chemical engineer, and he got tapped to. And I remember Sean Connery, losers always whine about doing their best, and the winners go home and F the prom queen.
He's like, my
And
wife
then he's
was
all
the
like, Carla
queen."
was the prom queen.
That was such a good Michael Bay movie. He had a good run. He did The Rock, he did Bad Boys, and then I think he kind of peaked in terms of his at Armageddon, where that was like the perfect Michael Bay movie.
But I thought The Rock, especially with like, because at the beginning, he's supposed to stick this thing into his heart, this syringe, because they think that this gas is going to go off in the test chamber, and he won't do it. And then at the end, he gets exposed to the gas and he runs out there onto the island and kind of falls to his knees, and he takes it and he sticks it in his heart. So it's like, okay, there's a different man from the beginning. Like he has become the action hero.
I don't know. There's a lot of problems with the fact that he took one of those string of pearls VX nerve gas, jarred it right into the guy's face, and somehow wasn't dead within 3 seconds. But aside from what I'm sure a chemical engineer would be able to explain to me was all the problems with The Rock.
I can
And you've
suspend my
got-
disbelief with that. I thought the character development was on point.
And,
I was
Vanessa
gonna
Marcel
say-
was very attractive, let's be honest.
Yes, indeed. But I was going to say too. Well, you've got a chemical engineer on this podcast, so maybe after we're done, we're going to have to make a bonus video where we're going to have to go back and look at that scene and tell you what I think. Gonna go.
Oh, a bonus video that puts everyone to sleep when you start. That's not VX gas forms a lattice that's not like that, so it would naturally affix itself to the inside of your nostrils and melt your eyeballs out before you could look down to pull out the syringe.
I'm sure that actually would probably do better on YouTube than our normal podcast episodes. If we can get a VTube anime girl with with a giant bust saying these things, it'll do 3 million hits.
We'll do a hot tub podcast with VX gas.
Very likely, yeah.
Which I mean, those are extra things to help sell, especially anything comics or video based. But of course, you do have to have a solid storyline underneath. And I know, speaking of stories, one other thing I did want to ask about too is I did see that you had the, of course, Dr. Alpha comic out there.
Oh,
Do you
yeah.
mind telling us also some about the basic plot, a little bit about it, and also where you've got it hosted for people to check that out?
Oh yeah, so Dr. Alpha is my comic book, the very first comic book I've ever done. Dr. Alpha Miracle Child is the full title of that book, and it's been complete.
Mhm.
It's ready to it's at the printers except for the paper shortage. But the basic plot is that Dr. Alpha is like this veteran super villain. Like he's a veteran evil scientist. The typical superhero versus mad scientist. He's that guy. He's the epitome of the mad scientist. I went super crazy with it. So he's like a mad scientist. I made him I based him off of Brad Pitt from Fight Club. He has that bad boy look to him. He's a kind of this alpha Chad kind of guy. of all the mad scientists. Like I have some backstory to him that isn't even in the book that kind of puts him at odds with other mad scientists and things. There's something called the Da Vinci Club, which I do actually talk about in the commentary if you got the hardcover, but it became at odds with things. The basic plot is that his arch nemesis, Glorious, comes to the prison for supervillains called Icarus Maximum Security. And he goes down there to the bottom basement where they're keeping Dr. Alpha behind this giant vault. And they open it up. And then he goes, and he's like, okay. They meet face to face, these arch nemesis. And he reveals that Mulvion, the Martian mastermind, if the full name is Mulvion Marvarius, the Martian mastermind, and he is going to invade Earth. They thought he was dead. They had faced him before, and last time they lost so many people, it was like a big tragedy. I kind of equate like when Brainiac comes along in DC. Like it's a huge thing. It's a huge event, and so it's like okay, well, he figures out that he knows that Dr. Alpha is he's at odds with Mulvion. They've been enemies for years because villains don't get together and get along necessarily because they're villains. They tend to be very self-absorbed and egotistical, and Dr. Alpha is very egotistical. And
I would imagine they
there.
both think that they're smarter than the other one.
Absolutely, that happens during the story too. They keep saying the other one is stupid compared to himself. It's like one point. It's like if Mulvion is beating up Dr. Alpha, and he's like, if Dr. Alpha can make this scientific miracle, then there's no reason why the great Mulvion cannot. And because Mulvion is like he's an alien from Mars, so he's kind of looks down on humans in general, and so especially like Dr. Alpha. It's great, and it's pretty fun. I had a lot of fun with it. It has some funny moments, has some serious moments, some brutal moments. Basically, they kind of go with the team of Crusaders, which is the superhero team that of this book, and they go after Mulvion, and there's a lot of twists and turns. That's kind of the story. He teams up the Crusaders, goes after Mulvion, and the clash happens from there. It's on Indiegogo, still hosted on Indiegogo for a moment. I'm going to close it down once I have the books, but I don't have them yet. They are on the way, though. They are the printers. They should be coming to me around February 7th, but it's still available at the moment. And also, the book will come with a bunch of extra stuff that you won't get. For example, if I ever sell it on Amazon or something like that, it's just going to be the story. This one comes with like a side story going over Mulvion and Dr. Alpha when they were kids, when they first met. It's like a 10-pager. It's pretty fun. It's a kind of a experiment in a story that actually has a beginning, middle, and end that doesn't actually have any fighting or anything. It's just two characters meeting and getting to know each other and stuff like that. But mainly the main plot of Dr. Alpha, that's kind of what it is. The classic supervillain arch nemesis get together and fight a larger threat. That's kind of the basis of the plot.
Seems like I'm an interesting basis. And the other thing I like too about that concept, I've seen in some other stories, and I want to hope to capture it in part of mine, is you don't always want it to just be a simple like, hey, this is the good team and this is the bad team, and we're just going to send them over there and beat them up and it's over, right? Like you want to kind of give people an idea of like, okay, here's something I didn't expect, and now we're going to show how the person you're not expecting to be the one to pull this off is able to do it, and here's why, even though you're not necessarily saying that like this is Superman, right?
Right. I mean, they're good guys, but they're so human. I still make sure that they're human.
Yes, indeed. And speaking of that too, I know that's something you've also commented on quite a bit as well, is the concept of the Mary Sue. And one thing that we love talking about on this podcast is what we called the Zero's journey. And I do remember at one point with Mary Sue's, we had a funny thread on Twitter in which I post it blows up. And because I based the Zero's journey off of Tim Burton's 2010 Alice in Wonderland, as well as on Wreck-It Ralph 2, I used one, I kept making a reference to she for the Zero, and then also made a reference to, of course, like she always also gets a simp at the beginning. So it's either, Ralph from Wreck-It Ralph 2 or the way they use the Mad Hatter in that story as well. And for some reason, like people just started like totally blowing up over that fact. And I remember one person in particular started saying, oh, like because James Bond always wins in the end and gets the girl, that makes him a Mary Sue.
Absolutely not. He
It
does
was
not make a
utterly
Mary Sue.
ridiculous.
James Bond has had so many bad things happen to him. I mean, when he was George Lazenby James Bond, he got married and his wife got blown up in the first 20 minutes of being married.
Because he's smooth and suave does not mean that he has had an easy go of things.
Exactly.
So I'm a big fan. For me, in my era, Pierce Brosnan's James Bond movies, I think were actually super underrated for as good as they were. And going to Goldeneye, in the first 10 minutes of Pierce Brosnan as James Bond, he is dealing with the guilt of feeling like he got one of his best friends killed on the mission. That's a pretty big thing where he feels bad about what he did and it causes him guilt.
Yeah, of course, the character was Sean Bean, and of course, you're like, oh, of course it's Sean Bean, he dies. But the thing is, even beyond that, it's a character flaw that he didn't actually see through his disguise, because it turned out that Sean Bean was not killed off, that he does come back towards the middle of the movie. He's like, oh, he's the bad guy the whole time. And James Bond didn't see it. He was fooled. He thought that that Sean Bean's character was actually on their side, and he got him killed. Mary Sue would have seen right through Sean Bean's disguise immediately. Like, oh, that guy was evil the whole time. Kind of like, I can give an example. Have anyone seen Invincible with Amber? And then she, Mark reveals to her that he's a superhero. And then Amber goes, I know already. What?
Of course I knew.
Of course you.
Yes.
And how did you know?
How'd you figure that out? No reason. She just knows. Like, I think he even asked her that, and she goes, "Oh, it was obvious. I mean, come on, I'm awesome. Of course, I knew you were a superhero."
The way they did Amber on that show was so terrible. I mean, and I almost feel like it was on purpose that they made the person of color character that way, so that it's almost like putting a landmine in front of Twitter, so that when people have genuine problems with the character and are complaining about how the character's problem, it's like, no, you're racist.
You're racist. She just knows that he's a superhero, even though they go from the previous episodes. They mention it, that people don't recognize people who are superheroes because they don't want to see them, and it's tough to recognize that. And so they actually mention that. They pull it into the plot that it's not really easy to recognize someone as a superhero, to find it out. And then hey Amber, I'm actually invincible. I'm actually this superhero. I know already. How the hell do you know? And then she goes, I just know. I just figured it out. Isn't it obvious? Like, no, it's not obvious. And it would have been something else if it was foreshadowed that she has detective. Maybe her dad was a detective or something like that, and she had detective skills. It never was established. She just knows because she's just awesome. That's it. She's just awesome. So one of the things I've seen, one of the arguments I've seen, is that the competent man character, which is James Bond pretty much is a Mary Sue. Not really, because usually the competent man, like James Bond, was he usually in his 30s, like mid 30s, something like that. Usually when you have those characters, like a John Wick character, Ito Agami character from Lone Wolf Cub, these sorts of characters, they really have a past. Like they went through the training and everything, so they really have to. See, people say, "Oh, you think Ray's a Mary Sue?" Well, obviously James Bond's a Mary Sue. Like, not necessarily. Ray began as a nobody. Ray began her hero's journey as a greenhorn, as a trainee, as a novice.
Yes.
James Bond always comes into the scene already has gone through his training. Usually, probably already has some missions under his belt. So it makes sense why he was more competent than someone who's just beginning. So no, James Bond is not a Mary Sue. Not even close. Not
Well,
even
For
and,
close.
and
my
another big difference is, James Bond, when he makes mistakes, they have consequences. The Mary Sue, in those weird circumstances where they make mistakes, the mistake somehow bumble fucks its way into a perfect outcome every time.
well,
Yeah,
I
it's either
bypassed the bad outcome.
Yeah, exactly. It's either it actually their mistake or their flaw or whatever it is actually helps them in some way. It turns out to be like a net positive, or it just gets instantly forgiven. Like, oops, I accidentally blew up Chewbacca. Oh, LOL, he was actually in another ship the whole time.
I think, was it Mahler who pointed that out, or was it one of those shows? Because I watched that and I was just like, holy shit, she really did just blow up Chewbacca. Oh no, there he is.
Yeah,
Wow.
there he is. Can't have Ray do something wrong. It's always someone else's fault. And notice the one thing that really irritated me. Did you know? Remember? If you remember the movie,
The
I
one
don't blame
thing.
you if you don't remember. Yeah, exactly. Is that the moment she blows up the
The
ship?
one of many.
Yeah, one of many. But the moment she blows up the ship with that they think Chewbacca's on, they think they destroy Chewbacca. She gets instantly forgiven. She's like, "Oh my goodness, I blew up Chewbacca!" And then Finn and Poe instantly swoop in like the simps they are and go, "Oh, it's not your fault. You're awesome and greatable and funny and smart and whatever it is that they say." And then
And
I
Finn
believe
looked like he was
Yoda
going
had
to
said,
react
once you
correctly.
go down the dark path, forever will it dominate your
yeah,
destiny.
forever will dominate your
Yeah.
destiny.
That's
So
right.
when
But
you just
Finn
blew
even
up your
looked like
Wookiee best friend, you're going to have some darkness in you now.
like Finn screamed like he thought Chewbacca had just been killed. It would have been nice to see that play out in the way it would have played out in a realistic
The way
setting,
it should have played
where
out.
like even if he saw that Chewbacca hadn't been killed, he'd have been like, "You are out of fucking control. You need to rein it in." But no, instead it's just like, "Oh, great job blowing up the ship. Glad Chewbacca wasn't on it. That really would have sucked, huh? Let's go."
It
Well,
would make
not
way
one
more
movie
sense
earlier, Finn got put in the brig for just questioning Admiral Gender Studies,
wanting to
not
leave.
telling people the plan.
Dude,
So,
in the first one, Finn was really good, and after that, he was just a tokenized facepalm every time he was on screen.
we
More or
had to
less,
go
yeah.
into the sequels, didn't we? It's just
Those
Well,
get me almost as hot as Cowboy Bebop at this point.
Well, but I mean, the Star Wars sequels are so like lightning rods for bad writing. It's just kind of if you talk about writing in general, and did you go into the ventures of the land of bad writing, it's inevitable that you'll eventually land at the Star Wars sequels because they're so riddled with horrible, horrible mistakes. Finn and Poe should have abandoned Rey at that point. It's like you're a monster.
Mm.
We don't want you here. You're no hero. Instead of instantly forgiving,
Yeah.
instantly forgiving her
So
for blowing up
in the
Chewbacca.
theme park of bad writing, I feel like the sequel Star Wars movies get a land. The Star Trek Discovery and the new Trek should get a land.
Of course, they've got to be significant enough, and so that's like things that were like dead on arrival, like High Guardian Spice, probably aren't good enough. Although we could come up with examples of movies that got big, or
Literature Devil fixed High Guardian
yes, he
Spice,
did.
okay?
That's true, he did. And,
That's a great show now. I want to watch it.
All you
Not
gotta do
really,
is
but-
apply some traditional storytelling and it gets a little bit
Yes.
better. Add some consequences, add some character growth, add some, basic writing elements, and it gets a little bit better.
but like, why do you need any of that? All you just need is some new magic.
We can put the Netflix anime adaptation land in that park too,
There
because
you
just
go.
a broad category of Netflix anime adaptations.
Pretty much, yeah,
Death
everything.
Note, Cowboy Bebop can have their own rides in that bad writing land.
Cowboy Bebop was horrendous. That was awful. The Death Note,
Yes. Let's
The-
talk about this.
well, the Death Note thing I found terrible, but I found it entertainingly terrible. Like it wasn't that bad. That to me anyway. I was like, oh,
Right, but
yeah,
the
this
Death
is
Note
cringe.
was never about having the gruesome, ridiculous Final Destination style death.
That kind of made it hilarious. Like, what is this? This is like
I
how
hated it.
Americanized.
I fucking hated it. That's not the point.
To be fair, I actually really like the Final Destination series. It's one of my guilty pleasure movies because I did really enjoy the just dramatic fake outs. As they got better at it from the sequels going on, they would do the thing where they'd build up and make you think it was going to go one way. And they did it a little in the first movie, but they got really good at it by the later ones. And my favorite was when the little kid ended up getting squished by the glass because he scared the birds after he'd been in the dentist office the whole time, and you thought he was going to die like in the dentist office. It was such a good like misdirect.
I'll tell you what, because of Final Destination, I still will not drive behind trucks hauling lumber. It will never happen. I will slow down to 20 miles an hour on the highway, or I will get around them as quickly as I
I
can.
will not get on a plane if I hear John Denver start playing. That's for sure.
I just don't like planes, so no problems there.
I mean, there's a place for poorly written but fun movies, and I think that's something that we've lost because we've gotten into poorly written, you have to like it movies, and they're not just fun bad movies anymore. They're not the Sharknadoes of the world.
I was
That is
about to mention Sharknado, and actually, yeah, that'll be a good question here, maybe for each person off the top of your head. Like, what was a fun, like, just badly written movie that you still ended up liking?
Kung Fu Hustle.
Okay,
I like Kung Fu Hustle. Yeah, it was pretty fun. I like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen movie. I thought that was a lot of fun. Although I am
It
biased on that
was.
one because there's a lot of literary characters going after some other literary villains, which is awesome. But I
I
still liked
loved
it.
that one actually.
The
I
issue
thought
I
it was
had with
I
it,
was so disappointed that people hated on it as bad as they would because they had lots of room for sequels because there were sequel comic books, and it was something where they took an Alan Moore property and actually made it fun. And there's something nice about that because Alan Moore is so depressing when you talk to when he talks in interviews. He like ruined comic books. I shouldn't say that. He's written really great comics in his time, but people are so much want to be the next Alan Moore.
They really do,
They
yeah.
can't let it be. So like the Tom Kings of the world want to be that, and it ruins my regular comic books.
Yeah, but people like
And
Tom King and stuff, they think that being like Alan Moore means being depressing and being dark and everything. Basically, Alan Moore happened to be depressing. He had to be dark and cynical and things like that. He was a good writer. He wrote good stories. It's in his style. You don't have to. Yeah, good stories does not equal cynical and dark, and darkness and cynicism does not equal good storytelling. Good storytelling equals good storytelling. That's kind of how it boils down to. You can actually have like a positive, upbeat story. You can have something that's real nice. Like I personally like All Star Superman, but you could totally have this nice, upbeat, cheerful story that is written well that can have the same impact as like an Alan Moore story or something like that. It's happened. Alan Moore's style is to be depressing and sad and tragic and stuff. But people like Tom King and all these modern day creators, they think that in order to be like Alan Moore, in order to be this top tier, well known comic book writer, you have to write like Alan Moore. You have to write in his way. You have to be cynical and you have to be depressing. You have to be dark and gritty. You don't have to. It's like I talked about in my videos. You have to find your own voice. Is your voice Alan Moore's voice? Is it like Alan was your cynicism and darkness and depression, stuff like that? Or is your voice more upbeat and positive? It depends on what you want to do. And it's you find that voice by practicing, by writing stuff. Yeah, you have to find it to actually doing the things you want to do. But don't gear yourself towards Alan Moore just because you like the guy. Gear yourself towards your own style. Take the basic structure elements of Alan Moore, which is the character. You can do that, the character, the story, things like that, and that you can use. But you can make like something else that was entirely interesting. Now, on that note, there's a book I really enjoyed, and I mention it in the commentary for Dr. Alpha, and that is Soon I Will Be Invincible. That one has a lot of parallels with Watchmen. It's about an evil scientist with superpowers, and then the other character it follows is a fledgling hero who just joins like this top tier superhero team. But the thing is, it's a really interesting story. It goes through this whole plot of someone killed the main character, the main hero, like the Superman hero of the universe. And it goes through the mystery, and they're going after Dr. Impossible. And it's really interesting. You get to see a lot of character development in these things. And Soon I Will Be Invincible is where I got this idea that where I first was exposed to the idea that superheroes are still super behind the scenes, like when they go to bed. Superman does not stop being Superman when he goes to bed. He still has to deal with these powers. And it goes into that, the drawbacks and the blowbacks and what they actually have to live with when you're a superhero with superpowers every day. And it's really interesting. I highly suggest Soon I Will Be Invincible. It's really good. Unfortunately, it seemed like there was like a one-hit wonder because I don't think he ever did anything that was, at least not anything that was significant. But it's not depressing. It's not Alan Moore. It's kind of funny. It's more there's some parody stuff with superheroes. It's very clear that the guy who wrote this loves superheroes as opposed to hating them, like Garth Ennis. While I do love Garth Ennis, it's clear that he hates superheroes as opposed to this guy who
he
loves
loves westerns and cowboys, but he
and the
hates
Punisher.
superheroes. Yeah,
Yeah.
which Punisher is basically a
Lone
vigilante
gunman.
cowboy character. Yeah,
Pretty much, yeah.
It makes sense that he would love the Punisher. Because I mean, if you look at Saint of Killers out of Preacher, there's a lot of common character elements to the Punisher. And then you can look at The Boys and kind of go with Billy the Butcher.
Oh yeah, Billy
Yep.
Butcher. That guy's
Yeah.
awesome.
Billy Butcher is another, basically, it's the same Punisher, Saint of Killers type archetype. Garth Ennis, and it's perfectly fine to have a muse type character and to know who your voice, your voice as a writer, and to use that in different perspectives, because you can look and there's a lot of nuance and difference between what he did with Welcome Back Frank with the Punisher, what he did in the Preacher with the Saint of Killers, and what he did with Billy the Butcher in The Boys. But it's kind of just taking the characters in different directions based on their organic story background, which is how you should do it.
Oh yeah, definitely. And speaking of Welcome Back Frank, I think that's the first story of Garth Ennis's I actually read, and I was like, "Whoa, this is awesome! This is great! I love the Welcome Back Frank storyline when it goes like up against Nucci's and all those sorts of things." And the opening was great. Right, it just opens up with him killing off of Nucci's sons, and then we go from there. So instantly, the conflict is sparked. Like it begins immediately. So overall, I do like Garth Ennis. And speaking of Garth Ennis, he actually did a joke comic. I think it's called The Pro, which it's a joke comic. It's about like and it's very clear that's kind of has the boys sort of feel to it, where he makes fun of superheroes, makes fun of Batman. Like that version of Batman in The Pro is like has very very homoerotic vibes between the Batman and his Robin, and they're very like in skimpy outfits and everything.
The ambiguously gay duo.
Exactly.
Ace and Gary.
And the thing is, that he actually does have. It's really interesting because it actually does have a character arc in the with the Pro, and she begins as this a regular person, like she's a hooker. That's why she's called the Pro, and she begins as a regular person, and by the end of the story, she has evolved into the kind of person that would sacrifice herself to save the world, and that's kind of what you get when you have an everyman character, or any character really. But one of the things really interesting about the everyman character is that we want to see them be larger than life, and the thing is, at the end of that, at the end of the arc, they become heroes within that story. By that I mean they're ready to sacrifice themselves. They're ready to give some sort of sacrifice for the greater good, which is the nature of heroism. The nature of heroism is sacrifice. Is why we don't have very many heroic characters today written by these Hollywood weirdos, because they don't really believe in sacrifice. They believe in what's good for me, what's in it for me. What can I do to spout off my own personality and my own politics or whatever.
A lot of these stories are they're shameless self-inserts, and they do not want to put themselves in a situation where they would have to learn or grow. So they're perfect.
I want to sit there and write a comic about yelling at my mother when she's Starfire because I'm an unattractive,
a fat, useless drain on society. That's what we're talking about now.
Yeah, I was being delicate. I wasn't going to call out Mariko Tamaki by name again. Oh wait, I did. Sorry.
Whoops.
So, stop
if you can find a comic book she wrote, and your boy Zach on Comics Matter, but he pointed out, like, if you can go 3 or 4 pages into one of her comics where they're not talking about food, I will buy you dinner. And I'm unemployed right now, so that could tell you how confident I am in that statement.
I wish they would stop trying to package up their therapy sessions and try to sell it to me. Okay. There are 2 things they try to sell you: their therapy sessions and their used tissue paper. Like, I don't want to buy either of those. I'm not interested.
Yeah, it's like, hey, you're clearly working through some issues right now. I want no part of them. Goodbye.
What about titles like was it the one that we redid? Was Mother of Madness? Like, don't you just want like 20 pages of exposition and armpit hair?
Oh my goodness. The first page is already tanking the whole work. I mean, that it's a splash page with like 10 million paragraphs of dialogue. Like, why even write a comic book at this point? Just write a prose.
Brian Michael Bendis saw that page and was like, wow, you did better than I ever could. Good job.
Yeah. Normally, if your story is going to be introduced that way, write a book.
By the way, that was a total in-joke for all the comics people, because Brian Michael Bendis writes lots of words in the comic books. It's just for people who don't know.
By the way, the one thing I learned by transitioning from prose work, which is novels and things, to comics, is that you really have to pay attention to how the dialogue, because not only do you have to make sure the dialogue is significant, which means that it has purpose, why they're saying things like that, either to highlight the character, advance a plot, whatever. But also it has to have the character in there, and also it has to be short enough where it doesn't just overtake all the panels.
It has to be real snappy.
Exactly. It has to be as short as possible, as much information as possible with the fewest words possible. Essentially, how it has to go. And it's really, really cringe when I saw that first page. I was like, "What the hell is this?" It didn't even read like natural dialogue. It read like a Twitter bio and a Twitter rant. That's what it felt like. That's kind of what I see in modern day writers
Mm-hmm.
is that they have stopped writing natural dialogue and natural stuff, and they started just writing tweets, but in comic book form.
They want to make sure that after you read the dialogue, you're just like slay queen, yes queen, slay.
I gotta throw this out there because I've been thinking of it ever since he first used the word prose, but the true pros write prose.
Oh yeah, that's definitely true.
Says the
Fantastic.
writer of the book on our normal
yeah.
panel here.
Yes.
I have
I mean-
flexed my superior literary muscles over all of you comic book plebs.
Look, I'm the plumbest of them all because I do comic strips. So if I go over 2 sentences in a character's panel, it's getting into a problem.
I was gonna say, man, like I've put so much into learning like how to write like the typical comics, and we're actually like lettering our first preview piece. It's a 9-pager. But I'm just thinking, like, for as much as I've learned about how to write in panels and stuff like that, and you're just cutting words. Then I turn and look at Vinny there, and I'm like, dude, like he can tell an entire story in 4 panels, dude. Like, how is that even possible?
With room for pictures, no less.
I know.
But I would say that is actually a great exercise if you're a verbose writer, is go on Twitter, and when you make your tweet, limit it to 1. I have to re-edit those things constantly because I can't fit it. I can't fit 1 tweet.
Yeah, but to go back
Yeah, it
to
really helps.
like writing comic dialogue in tweets, and of course, because we did that Mother Madness episode, and then we did the rewrite bonus episode, which was really fun. I remember that was one of the things we hit on was something that happens in a lot of those type of stories is it's like, oh, like I'm gonna write out I'm a character with this trait and that trait, and I did this and I did that. It's like, why don't you just like write that on your note page outside of the comic and then say, okay, how are we going to show? And I think that's also you're an important thing. Like each medium has that kind of thing that demands from it, whether it's the way movies do it, the way comics do it, the way you do it in prose. That really you don't want to just sit there and list all the things about the person. You kind of just want to say, okay, how do we establish that without having to just spend a page of them or someone else just saying it as a matter of process? And you said you learned it in college specifically, but what are some things that you commonly see people kind of like needing to learn as they either get into like writing prose or writing comics? Like, have you coached some other writers? Like, tell us some of the things you've seen from there.
One thing new writers tend to need to learn is restraint. Calm down, go back and see what actually matters in terms of dialogue and exposition, because it's really easy. I know this from personal experience. I'm not saying I'm better than anyone else, because I know this because I've gone through this, is that you're really excited about the world that you made. You're really excited about the character that you made. You're really excited about the research that you did, for example. And then a lot of writers will tend to go in and they'll just start off with the prologue. A lot of new writers tend to want to write a prologue because it's cool, because it's really, really neat. Like it's really fancy. My story begins with a prologue, and I did this too. I used to do this too. Like when Lord of the Rings was a big thing, everyone write a prologue. Here's the ancient war that happened 10,000 years ago. Not really suggested. I wouldn't suggest that. I would suggest starting off with a story and then moving on from there. Begin the plot as soon as possible. I think it was was it Kurt Vonnegut? I think it was Kurt Vonnegut who mentioned that you want to begin the story as close to the end as you possibly can. And I think it was writing short stories, but that's basically anything. Just begin the story as close to the end as you can. But back to the main point is that a lot of writers will tend to not have restraint, and they will just info dump, just vomit information at you, and nobody cares. I kind of equate this to like DMs, dungeon masters, because I've seen a lot of players, like Dungeons and Dragons players, complain about this problem specifically, where you begin play and the dungeon master go in about the world, and you're the kingdom of this, and it was founded in this era by this king, and then info dump. Like I don't care. And that Dungeons and Dragons is a really good practice, I think, because what the players care about are what the readers care about. They don't care about the ancient kingdom of whatever, and then the founder of the kingdom. Okay, they want to get to play. They want to get their characters in. They want to start going on quests, killing monsters.
Whoa, wait. Are you saying
going.
that your readers just want to be a bunch of murder hobos and kill every NPC that you put in front of them?
Essentially, yes. That's kind of how it happens. Like they begin with having the main character punch out a guy, okay, and then once we start with the character, once we know the character, boom, we start caring about stuff, and then when it's relevant to the character or relevant to the plot, then you can start talking about your dragons and your kings and ancient stuff. In fact, I always go to Dark Souls, like the first Dark Souls game.
Oh, it was amazing.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, what the world building really isn't. It's there. It's definitely there, but it's not really in your face. But by the time you kind of get into the world and get into the character and everything, you start to become organically interested in the world around you, and you start looking at the descriptions of items and wondering how did this thing become this? Like, what's the purpose of Sen's Fortress? Like, where did this guy come from? How come this guy isn't dead? That sort of thing. So we begin to care about it once we get invested in the character and the plot. Same thing that interests the players of Dark Souls. It's because we get interested in the characters first, and then boom, we get interested in the world around us because we're really, really intrigued about this stuff. So
And
info dumps,
especially with Dark
they kill your
Souls,
stories.
they did an amazing job of like the story is there, it's in the game. You just have to want to find it because
Exactly.
my first playthrough of Dark Souls, like I got as far as Ornstein and Smauv, and I couldn't beat him,
That was a
and I
tough
ended up
fight.
starting over. But I was so interested in what the fuck was going on.
Like, who are these guys?
Yeah, the second playthrough, I started reading the lore. I started looking at item descriptions because you can get a lot of the story if you just stop and take the time to absorb the story.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
So I'm thinking
And
now is kind of like a thought for right, other creators listening as well as for ourselves. Like on the one hand, you're like when you start preparing it, and I know it's like a temptation I'm fighting so much right now, is you're right, like you do go and build this entire interesting world, all this history, and in your mind it's like, man, I can see everything that happened before issue 1, and I can see everything like way out. And you got to hold yourself back and say, hey, let's just drop this one guy into the world and like let's just start following him around and like let's only show that for now. Would that be like a good way to kind of think about it?
oh yeah, definitely. There's a thing in Japanese manga called the slice of life, which is you would think
My
would be boring.
favorite kind of anime.
Exactly. You would think it'd be boring, and it sounds boring. It's not my favorite, but if you do watch Slice of Life, it tends to draw in a lot of eyes. It tends to draw in a lot of interest, and like these things have like no plot really. Like what we would typically call a plot. There's like no terrorist to be stopped, for example. It's usually just like two characters just talking about nonsense. But what makes it interesting is something that people should take into account is that it's the character. Like Slice of Life, the way it's usually presented, would fall apart completely. It's just that the fact that you have to have really good, strong, compelling characters. And usually, in good slice of life, you have really strong, compelling characters. And that goes for pretty much any genre of fiction. If you have good, strong, compelling characters, you have a high chance, not exactly a guaranteed chance, but a high chance of succeeding and having them be really, really interesting. Because we don't really remember like Superman doing whatever in this comic. We remember Superman. We remember Luke Skywalker. We remember Darth Vader. We remember characters. We remember people. So first and foremost, make sure your characters are on point. And I think I've heard this from several different people, from several different. The Rocky. I think the guy who made JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. I read his book, and he makes the same point. I believe. I think some other people from Hollywood have I heard seen interviews, and it's all about character. It's all about character. I mean, Rocky goes through the whole thing about his own writer's journey, and now how he's actually, in order to write his own stuff, in order to get picked because he really wanted to be a writer, a mangaka. He actually read tons and tons and tons of other successful mangaka and trying to pull elements from them. And he found out that one of the most powerful elements you have to get right is the character. They have to feel real. They have to feel unique. They have to feel as if you can attach to them. And they have to feel like someone you want to follow around.
They have to feel like people.
Yeah, like people, not like caricatures. So it's this one of the big reasons why a lot of the modern day media kind of fails, because they're all like the same person and they all like cardboard cutouts rather than actual people. Like people don't really like Mary Sue's because Mary Sue's are not people. They're like kind of cardboard cutouts of like porcelain statues. They're just perfect. They're awesome. Everyone loves them. Like they're just there to be admired, not really to run through any gambits or anything like that. And that's kind of what a big dampener in them. And what we really want to see is a good, compelling character first and foremost. I mean, I can't remember exactly what the quote was, but it's like your character runs through a plot, but no one will care about the plot if you're not interested in the character. If you're not interested in the character, you won't be interested in seeing him run through the plot.
A great example of that comes to mind, because I was just watching this movie just recently, is First Blood, which is the first Rambo movie.
Yeah.
So in First Blood, the plot is actually about Rambo as a very traumatized, PTSD suffering Vietnam veteran who's accosted by local police and then just trying to make his way through and ends up like taking on this entire police department, National Guard troops, just wrecking house. But at the end of the movie, Rambo, as played by Sylvester Stallone, has what I think is one of the better monologues in movies in that era, where he's breaking down what it was like as a Vietnam veteran coming home, not being able to work, being homeless now. All his friends are dead. He saw him die in front of him. Like, it's very, very relevant to a lot of people who served in the military now and dealing with some of the trauma that they've dealt with. But what's funny is, to get to your point, literature, is people came out of that movie and all they remembered and felt was Rambo's a badass character. And that leads to Rambo 2, First Blood Part 2, where he's just now an action god going
the
out. Yeah.
action icon. Yeah.
Yeah, and that and evolves from there. But if you look at the first movie from a plot standpoint, what actually is being said, it's very different. It's actually a very psychological, like, driven movie about the trauma of war. And because people just came away remembering the character, it created a movement for moving into sequels where he's just now an action hero. He had a Saturday morning cartoon. I mean, it became a meme thing where Rambo was just like an action guy, but in the first movie it was not that. But the people who watched it and loved it, just that impression that they're left with from a character standpoint is just Rambo's badass. I like Rambo. I want to see more Rambo.
Exactly. We remember the character, not necessarily the story, but the character. So,
Yeah, and there's an interesting kind of like a struggle and payoff kind of situation, because if you create a character, especially your main character, your readers are going to, on a subconscious level, put themselves in that character's shoes. So if that character does not have any struggles, then it diminishes any payoff that you try to give them at the end. And if there's no payoff, then it is a forgettable situation. Like if you buy your kid a cell phone and then the kid breaks the cell phone and you buy the kid another cell phone immediately, the kid does not appreciate the cell phone because there was no work put into
Hey,
earning it or maintaining it.
exactly.
I'll do
What
you one better. In my high school, it was, I remember this like one like lawyer dad bought his daughter a brand new Mustang.
Of course, of the rich kids in their rich kid cars.
3 months later, she totals it, and then 4
And then
months
she gets an even better car.
a BMW.
Fucking bitch.
Yeah, rewarding someone for messing up is not really what you want to be doing. Not really the best way.
Well,
to
that's
go
the
about
Mary
it.
Sue. I
That's the Mary
messed up.
Sue.
It all worked out great.
Yeah, in fact, things got better. Right? You chopped off my hand, and then they find out that that hand actually had disease on it, and it would have killed you if she hadn't chopped it off. Stuff like that happens.
Yeah, good thing she did that for you.
Yeah,
If you want to see a good story about chopping off the hand, go to Evil Dead 2 and then Army of Darkness, because
Evil got into it, so I had to lop it off at the wrist.
And Ashley is not a male, by the way. His name is Ashley, but is definitely not a Mary Sue, because it's entertaining because he gets his ass handed to him constantly, and I love that movie so hard.
Yeah, the reason why it's called a character arc is because the character is supposed to change, go over obstacles. If you don't have an arc to your story, you just have a flat line and it's dead on arrival.
We also do a few like comic and other review videos on here. We're starting to do that. And again, like I was starting to call this concept like catalytic storytelling, just because it's after what I did as a chemical engineer. But it's like
it's branding. It's okay to brand things.
It is okay. And but the example is like, hey, like if you throw something into a reactor and then 2 hours later you pull it out and it's the same thing, what you conclude is if your catalyst or your process, it did not work. And it's the same thing for characters, which is if it's the same person at the end of it, then for all intents and purposes, nothing happened. And if nothing happened, you don't have a story.
Pretty much, yeah. It's exactly what kind of occurs. Basically, it's just like an anecdote instead of an actual story. What's the point of it? Not cool. It's a cute little story. It's kind of like, the famous scene in Trains, Planes, and Automobiles. How about when you tell a story, have a point. It makes things so much easier for the listener. So much better.
Yes. I was going to say that's our family Thanksgiving tradition. Is that movie?
It was Planes, Trains. I love Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. That is the best John Candy movie ever.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
It's like the only Thanksgiving movie too, or like one of the only ones.
It is. Yeah. Well, that and Dutch. Dutch is the only other one that you can, with Ed O'Neill, where he's going to pick up the stepson.
Maybe Uncle Buck.
Yeah.
Uncle Buck is not Thanksgiving, but it is a great John Candy movie.
I'm on the John Candy thing. John Candy is one of my favorites.
I mean, if you want to get into John Candy, you can get into Great Outdoors, which is really underrated. You could. What are you about to say? You don't like the Great Outdoors?
I would never say that I don't
Get
like
off this
the Great
podcast, you
Outdoors.
son of a bitch.
Listen here, you. I have a discerning taste when it comes to. No, I don't dislike the Great Outdoors. It's just like it's not my favorite. It's
All
just
right.
it's just okay to me.
Real boy with feelings, okay?
I was gonna say,
I
and of
mean-
course, if we're talking about John Candy, how can we forget?
Camp
Was that
Candy?
Spaceballs?
Oh, yeah, of
Oh
course.
yeah, Barb.
He's a,
That
Your
was a good
Falls is
character.
amazing.
he's a Mog. He's his own best friend.
That's right.
Oh, what about what is it? Armed and Dangerous, where he's the police officer who gets fired and becomes a low rent security guard with Meg Ryan in that one. In Vacation, he played the security guard at Wally World
Okay.
that said he would throw up on the ride, but didn't this time when Clark was holding him hostage. I mean, I don't know if you're counting cameos.
Yep.
If while we're going like full on John Candy, I will not say Wagons
Candios.
East because that was Wagons East was terrible.
Yep. Well,
Canadian Bacon, was that his last movie, if I remember right? I think I've just named more John Candy movies than most people do.
Maybe I have like a John Candy box set that even has like a documentary about John Candy's career. But
Look,
It was
I'm
good
just
Home
saying,
Alone.
bring up Camp Candy. I mean, if you were a little kid and you watched the cartoon, that's where it was at. He had his own Saturday morning cartoon, and there's nothing that says successful man of the 80s, early 90s like having your own Saturday morning cartoon.
it's amazing when you think about how many like not good role models got Saturday morning cartoon shows, like Beetlejuice. Beetlejuice gets a Saturday morning cartoon show where he's the good guy when clearly in the movie he was
He's
a
the bad
horrible piece of shit.
Yeah.
yes.
That was a good cartoon series, though. I really like that one. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
It
to
was
watch.
a really
the
good cartoon. I mean, and plus he was teamed up with Lydia, who was the underage girl he was trying to force into marriage. So there's a little bit
She has
there.
magic powers in this one.
Yeah, apparently they squashed that. Like they came to an understanding, I guess.
I mean, if you want to
Yeah.
get into like the worst transition to a Saturday morning cartoon, it was the Toxic Avenger on Fox Kids, because the Toxic Avenger was a trauma movie, and and trauma was in no way for children at all. And Fox decided, you know what, let's make a Saturday morning cartoon for kids, so that when they want to see like where this came from, where did the Toxic Avenger come from, they'll start looking on the brand new thing called the internet, and they'll find out about trauma movies, and that's not going to do damage to anybody.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of what they're doing now with Warhammer 40k, like the most bleak, gritty, grim, dark thing you can find. They're trying to make 40k for kids. Why would you do that? Doesn't make
I
sense.
know.
I feel like there's
there are
a
some
Starship
titles-
Troopers vibe to that, like where the kid is stomping the bugs and the teacher is like,
I love it.
Starship Troopers probably was heavily inspired by 40K. In all honesty,
well, it's the
Mhm.
opposite because the books went. I mean, there's the books go back to the 50s with anyway.
yeah, but like if you look at the visuals of Starship Troopers, they were pulling heavily from 40K miniatures for some of their vehicles and such.
Indeed. And going back to that with the kids part of it, I feel like there are certain titles, like it's supposed to be when you're in high school, there's that like weird kid that introduces you to it. Like 40K is supposed to be one of those.
The
Yeah,
weird
and
kid.
now,
On
now
one
that you
corner of the
mention 40K,
cafeteria, you've got the Warhammer kids, and on the other, you got the Magic kids, and it's like,
That's right.
It's like,
I was
which
a
way,
Magic kid.
Western man? Which way?
I was a Magic kid, but also now that I think about it, yeah, the soldiers in Starship Troopers, like go look at Imperial Guard miniatures sometime from Warhammer 40K.
There you go.
They look exactly like soldiers from Starship Troopers, trench coats and all.
Yes, indeed. And I know because we're coming up on the hour here, there's maybe one more fun question we can do. Because of course, one thing we also know is that writing is rewriting. And one thing we're curious about, do you have kind of a fun example of when you had to either like change the story or when you had an idea that you thought was good, but during the rewriting, you're like, nah, I got to take this out. Do you have any of those that come to mind?
Oh yeah, when I was writing Dr. Alpha, I was like, here's a good point I want to put in. Here's another thing I want to put in. Things like that. And then it actually mostly happened when I was translating it from short story or, story, prose work to comic. And I was like going through the dialogue and everything. I was like, at first, of course, when you're first writing something like, oh, this is great, this is awesome, everything's fantastic, and there's no one who will not like this. And then, you do the Stephen King thing. You put it down. This is how you become your own editor. You put it down for a while, and then you let it like just sit there, and I guess you say breathe and everything, and the excitement goes away. And you go back to it, and then you go, what the hell was I thinking? What is this dialogue? This is embarrassing. And you go in there and you have to rewrite it. That's the best way to do things. You rewrite it and then you love it. You absolutely love it. It's like perfect in your eyes. It can do no wrong. And then the ideal thing, put it back down, let it rest a while, and you come back to it, and wow, it's this cringe. And so I did that with Dr. Alpha like a couple of times, and rewrote things, took out whole sections of story, rewrote entire dialogue scenes, and it happens quite a bit. It happens especially when you let it rest a while.
That is kind of exactly what happened with my first story. I was down in, I think, Pensacola, Florida at the time, and I was away from the family because it was more than 6 months, so they didn't get to come or it was less than 6 months, so they didn't get to come with me. So every night after classes, I was like, I'm gonna go home, I'm gonna write 1,000 words, I'm gonna go to bed. And I just kept doing that, and eventually I churned out like a 70-something thousand word story, and then I was just like, fuck it, and I threw it up on Amazon for just self-published. Like, here you go. I mean, I've moved like 500 or 600 copies, but it was because I made it free, and whenever I make it free, it seems to move a lot. But
Yeah, people like free stuff. Yeah.
But then I go and I look and I read it like a year later, and I'm like, oh man, I fucked this all up. Like, I wish I'd have let this sit.
What have I done?
I'm gonna have to rewrite this at some point and make like the definitive edition or something, because like there are some lines in there that are just awful. I'm like, oh my god, like no,
this is embarrassing. I know that. I know that feeling. What have I done? What was I thinking? Why would I write this?
As long as it had a strong female lead, it can get made into a movie. So you've
just
got
throw it
that
back.
going for you.
And then you go back to ideas. Ryan Johnson bragging, "Oh, I did this in one go." Like, yeah, it clearly shows. It clearly shows you this in one go.
No, that story definitely would not be it. That story would probably rile up the wrong crowd, because like the main character has a love interest, and at one point she gets kidnapped, and she is the damsel in distress he has to go rescue.
Oh no! Did you try to fridge a girlfriend?
No. Luckily,
because Gail Simone will have words for you.
Luckily,
That's right.
in that same fight, he has to fight a female black dragon who fights him in human form, and she kicks the ever-loving shit out of him.
Wait, but what kind of dragon?
A black dragon.
All right, you're canceled.
But she's not an African-American dragon. She's an
African-American dragon.
style black dragon. She spits acid.
It doesn't matter, dude. The algorithm says.
Yeah, but since she does spit acid, when I do like the Cast Shadows High School anime spin-off, she'll just be a rapper who just spits fire on the mic, and it'll work. I can make this work. I can make this cool.
I feel like we're getting into like My Little Pony Equestria Girls territory.
I mean, Equestria Girls is that kind of is like that's kind of like what anime does with some of their spin-offs.
They do it well.
Look,
though.
I watched Isekai Quartet and it made me laugh. I'm not gonna pretend it didn't. Let's get that plug one more time, Literature Devil. Where do they find Dr. Alpha again?
Oh yeah, Dr. Alpha Miracle Child, my first comic. It's still available on Indiegogo for now. It's still available, at least for the next few weeks or so. And if you want to check it out, go over there. Look at Dr. Alpha Miracle Child. Should come up.
Yep. And I'd say, of course, yeah, check that out. We'll definitely get the link up on our podcast episode. And of course, guys, do make sure to check out Literature Devil's YouTube channel and streams, as well as the Twitter account. They're always fun to follow. And really, in the literary space, it is the devil doing the Lord's work in this one. So with that, just want to wish you all guys a good night. And for the other co-hosts, we'll be seeing you next week. Everyone have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.